Hi, welcome to Manifold Recording. My name is Ian Schreier. I'm the chief engineer here. So this experiment was all about taking traditional bluegrass instruments and putting them in a non-bluegrass setting. So we have these traditional bluegrass sounds, and we're trying to turn them into a funky, groovy Stevie Wonder song, I wish. And I'll demonstrate to you how all these various parts fit together and see how the groove evolves. In many bluegrass sessions, you essentially have a group of people in a circle playing around a group of microphones to achieve a certain cohesive sound. In this particular case, starting with the idea of a center point of the room, we set up the instruments and the players, sort of spreading them out evenly away from that point, and using some physical barriers, some gobos, and microphone patterns to achieve the amount of separation that we wanted to. It starts with a single omni microphone that is equidistant from all of the relative positions of the player. And the thing that is really different about this is when we get to the stereo portion of this microphone cluster, I have sort of a modified Bloom line setup, which is two microphones at 90 degrees in figure 8. And the idea behind this was to not capture the instruments, but to capture the ambience of the room. The sides of the microphones are actually the null points. So the instruments themselves are actually outside the pattern of the microphones.
Does it go without saying if you have great sounding walls, you might as well record them?
Absolutely. We still want to capture the cohesive sound of them all playing at the same time and the way that the sound combines in the physical universe and how that enters a microphone as opposed to combining all of the signals in the electronic universe. An omni with a general pickup of all of the instruments, and then a stereo ambience that is actually not getting the instruments, but getting the reflections off the walls. Starting with the position of the singer-violinist, the microphones are set to sort of maximize our separation while still allowing for great visual sightlines and cohesive sound of everybody in the same room. I have a ribbon microphone here above that was primarily for the violin, and its natural figure 8 pattern meant that this side of the microphone was pointing at the instrument, and the back side of the microphone is pointing up at the farthest corner of the room, being the farthest reflection, which means that everything on the sides is outside of the pattern, thus giving us a little bit more isolation. This microphone was set to cardioid, primarily because of this glass. I would have tried to use figure 8, once again, a more focused pattern, but because of the glass and the reflection off the glass, cardioid ended up working better. And because we're close enough to the barrier, what we have is shading from the other sounds in the room. So the sounds from the other instruments are from reflections in the room as opposed to directly from the instruments, thus separating in time and giving not so much isolation, but greater separation of that sound and more control over the balance of the instruments. Mm-hmm. So for the banjo, the microphone choices were once again a ribbon that's in figure 8. The ribbon microphone choice in this case is primarily a sonic choice. But once again, we have the pattern of one side pointing down towards the instrument, the other side of the figure 8 pointing up towards the far reflective surface, and the nulls being on the side directions. The other microphone is a tight cardioid condenser that I was using to get a bit more of the sound of the pick on the strings and a bit of the shimmer that comes from the string microphones. So we have a cardioid microphone, but once again, we are also taking advantage of this physical shading from an object that is blocking sound from the backside of the microphone. This is especially important because of an instrument like a banjo that has a flat front surface. Any sound that hits the front of the banjo is reflected and goes straight back into the microphone. Another decision to help separation without isolation is the notion of using rugs on the floor to reduce the reflections off of the floor. It's very easy to forget about the importance of the floor in how you make calculations in terms of positioning your microphones. In this particular case, reducing the additional reflections is helpful, and also it makes for a quieter recording because there's less foot tapping sound.
So what are those two different cardioids giving you?
So the two different cardioids, here we have one that is essentially picking up the shimmer of the strings as well as a bit more pick strumming sound. And here we have an instrument that is getting a bit more of the body and the sound coming out of the F-holes.
Right.
This gives me sonic choices in balancing the woodiness of the instrument and the brightness of the instrument, and how round, how thin, how full, without touching an EQ knob. Once again, we are using two cardioid condensers. You'll notice that the positions of the microphones, the null side of the pattern is facing the other sounds, and also on a bias to avoid some of the reflections that hit the front of the guitar. Also using a rug underneath the player, which helps to reduce reflections coming off of the floor and into the guitar. In summary, setting up the room this way has allowed us two different options when we get to the mixing phase. Both the ability to highlight the individual instruments as you would need to in order to achieve a Stevie Wonder-like production, but also capturing the group instruments and the holistic sound of them all performing together at the same time in the same room and their natural blend. Okay, here we go.
Video rolling.
Big platform, sparkly boots. Oh, okay, so here we are in the control room. Let's see what we got. We'll start by listening to our room and ambience mics. So here is the Omni. This is the mic that's sort of equidistant from everybody. Now let's see what we captured with the blue line pair. Now we'll blend them together and see how the combination worked. Nice. Nice representation of what's going on. Let's check out our distant room mics. Also a really nice balance. Now let's put them together.
Mama gives you money for Sunday school. You trade your
So, quick check on our close sounds. Here's our close guitar. Now our close mandolin. And you can hear the difference. This is the woodier part of the instrument. Let's listen to the dry banjo. So you can also once again hear the rhythm, the ribbon mic, sort of the banjo head and a bit more round. We add some of that cardioid condenser to give it a little bit more punch. Without the rhythm, or without the ribbon. With it, without the condenser. With the condenser. Let's put it all together. So let's listen to our close vocal mic.
After church is through, I'm smoking cigarettes and writing something nasty on the wall.
So this is our close vocal mic. This is the Telefunken U47.
Sends you to the principal's office down that hall. You grow up to learn that kind of thing ain't right. But while you
Sounds
were
beautiful.
doing it,
I love
it
that
sure
mic.
felt out of sight. I wish those days.
So now let's start putting everything together. We'll start with the dry sounds and then add the room.
Ever have to go? I wish those days could come back once more. I did those days. Yeah. Ever have to go? Looking back on when I was a little happy-headed girl, but then my only worry was for Christmas what would be my toy. Even though we sometimes would not get a thing, we were happy with.
Now let's bring in some of our room.
Sneaking out the back door to hang out with those hoodlum friends of mine. Greeted at the back door, boy, thought I told you not to go outside. Trying your best to bring water to your eyes, thinking it might stop you from whooping your behind. Wish those days.
Now let's add some of our more distant room. So balancing the two ambients together.
A brother says he's telling about you playing doctor with that girl. But just don't tell, I'll give you anything you want in this whole wide world. Mama gives you money for some church is through, smoking cigarettes and writing something nasty on the wall.
So this experiment was all about taking traditional bluegrass instruments and putting them in a non-bluegrass setting. So we have these traditional bluegrass sounds, and we're trying to turn them into a funky, groovy Stevie Wonder song, I wish. And I'd like to demonstrate to you how all of these various parts fit together, and you can see how the groove evolves. So we did use a click track that would allow us to do overdubs later, and also to help lay down the bass line, which will be the fundamental drive, or the downbeats that all of the syncopated other ingredients work against. So we did start with our click. So the click track sounds like, and our bass. Now in this case, we only sent the click track to the bass player. So none of the other players were listening to the click, because we wanted a very human-like performance. And the bass, that just allowed the bass player to lock into the click and gave us the ability to make sure, since the beginning of the song and the end of the song were going to stay the same tempo, that we would be able to overdub comfortably. So, 1, 2, 3, 4. So now, as we start to add syncopated rhythms, slowly it begins to build as a groove. We also added some percussive elements that came from the violin to give us a bit of a backbeat. Just a simple stab. And our overdubbed, well, let's go back to our bass, our groove. So now we're slowly adding the syncopated elements and some percussion. Also, one of the most important rhythmic aspects, which I forgot, is the banjo. So let me back up for just a second. So against our rhythm section, we also have a very complex keyboard part that's being played by the banjo. In this particular case, it's playing the role of a clavinova being played by Stevie. Let's add the vocal.
You grow up and learn that kind of thing ain't right. But while you were doing it, it sure fell out of sight. Wish those days could come back once more.
We're going to need some compression and EQ, but not for this moment.
Ever have to go
So
out with those
you start to see all of the rhythmic elements assembling themselves into a funky groove, and using it, with the exception of the bass, instruments that are at least a century old. Now let's bring in just a little bit of the ambience of the live performance into what we've built.
trying your best to bring the water to your eyes, thinking it might stop her from whooping your behind. I wish those days could come back once more. I did those days ever have to go. I wish those days could come back once more. I did those days ever have to go, 'cause I love them so.
See how all the parts fit together? ambience adds a very nice warm sound to everything. It brings in a little bit of the traditional bluegrass kind of recording. So this is with the ambience.
Mama gives you money for Sunday school. You trade yours for candy after church is through. Smoking cigarettes and writing something nasty home. A teacher sends you to the principal's office.
We also added some vocals to mimic the horn parts.
You grow up and learn that kind of thing ain't right. But while you were doing it, it sure fell out of sight. I wish those days, ooh, come back once more. What did those days ever have to go? I wish those days, ooh.
Obviously, these are all just raw sounds. They haven't been compressed or EQ'd or anything like that. And for a modern recording like this, we will have to add some of that processing to make everything sort of fit together. So those are the ingredients of how we're playing a funk groove with bluegrass instruments. There you go.